So we finally got a firmware upgrade for the LivePro L1. It's now become the LivePro L2. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the channel, folks. This is Shane. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell. I do audio and video tutorials and reviews. So in today's video, we're checking out the LivePro L1 again, which, as I mentioned, is now the L2. The firmware has been finally upgraded, which addresses a lot of the issues. Not all of them, but a lot of them, and this now will be fine for a lot of people's use cases. This will allow me to switch cameras and retain good quality audio thanks to the shotgun microphone right above my head. So just to quickly explain the setup, I've got my GH5 here with an XLR adapter, and then I have my secondary camera, which is another GH5 looking down at the LivePro, and then I've got my Mac connected in as well, so you can see the screen, which is great, and you should still be hearing my voice from the main shotgun microphone, which was something that wasn't an option before. The audio options pretty much crippled this, and a lot of people didn't think Feelworld would release an upgrade for it, but I'm so glad they did, because now this will tick a lot of boxes at a far cheaper price than some of the other alternatives out there. If you missed my original review, I tried to cover as many pros and cons of the LivePro L1 as I could, having experience with a number of different units, including the A10 Mini and A10 Mini Pro. This entire video, I'm going to try my best to record from this to my computer back here, but also redundancy thanks to the YOLO box. But I'm going to use this for the entire video. Now, we're going to get into how to update this first, and then we'll talk a little bit about the process involved into getting it set up and working in this particular format with a multi-camera setup whilst still having good quality audio. The first thing you want to do to upgrade the firmware is to head over to the Feelworld site. I'll leave a link in the description below. It'll be a bit.ly link just to save the length. It's really long. And you can download the LivePro firmware here. Now, this is firmware version 2, basically, is what it's saying. And we also have now the LivePro XPOSE soft for Mac, which is version 1.007, and the Windows version 1.005. When I first got my hands on the Feelworld LivePro L1, there was no links in that download section. So I had to scour the web, and the only XPOSE software I could find was in, I think, Chinese or Cantonese or something. I'm not exactly sure. But it was impossible to know exactly what to do or how to hook it up. But now it's made easy. So it works. And it still lacks certain functionality I wish it would have, but now we've seen there's a little bit more potential for it to grow over time, which is really cool. When it comes to upgrading the Feelworld LivePro L1, simply grab an Ethernet cable, plug it into the side, and hook it up to your local network. So either a router or a switch or something like that, and you'll be good to go. The first thing you want to do is find the IP address of this on your network. Now, the software suggests you do find it another way, which is really convoluted. The easiest way is just to come over to the unit and hit the menu button over here. And then we want to scroll down until we get to IP settings, and that will be your IP address on screen. So 2 clicks, it's much easier to find this way than to go through the instruction manual and assume it's a certain IP address. It looks really complicated on the setup, but once you've got that done, that's all you need to do. You'll launch the firmware, and I'll leave some stuff on screen to show you the process, but it's really easy. It auto updates, and you'll be good to go. And once it's done, it does take a little while. You'll see a completed message pop up on screen. You can do this on Mac or PC. I did it on my Mac, and it worked, I think, the second time I tried it. So now, if you're not sure of your actual IP address, do it the way that I suggested, and then punch that into the firmware upgrade process, because you'll need to input that IP address so it finds it on the network. So if we take a look at the XPOSE software, odds are it's going to look very, very familiar. It's basically a software representation of the physical unit itself. Now, there's only really one difference, and that's that on screen here on the 2-inch TFT display, we're seeing exactly all of the live previews at once, which I love this feature. It's definitely one of the best things about the unit over a lot of other options out there. But on the software version, we don't get that. Now, your instinct might be, hey, maybe I can click on here on the actual 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the grid in the center of the screen, but you can't do that. It's basically exactly the same as this, because you can't touch anything on here. You've got to use the buttons that are down the bottom if you're going to do this via switching. So if I'm going to say switch from this view, which is what you're looking at right now, back to my main camera, all I had to do there was click on number 1 down the bottom, and now I've clicked back on number 2 down the bottom here, and that's allowed me to switch like that. Now, if I have the T-bar active, you can simply drag this around, but I don't use this. I just have it to set to cut mode. If you don't know about that and you prefer to use the transition bar, I'll leave a link to my full review and I'll show you how to use that. Nothing has changed in that regard, but this opens up some opportunities now to use this in a 2-person configuration or just use it via the laptop. It's pretty cool. So they are getting better. I'm going to just show you some of the deep menu options now as well. This stuff just wasn't available before. So if we hit this menu button over here, you want to hit menu, but it doesn't work. So you hit the M and it brings up all of this stuff here. So this is great. Now we get a sense of what's going on with our inputs. It tells us everything that we need to know. It says HDMI 1 is at 50 frames per second, which means I accidentally set that a little bit higher, but that's all right. HDMI 2 is set at 60 and HDMI 3 is set at 50. So the 60 is my laptop and that's just its default refresh rate, but it's going to output this just to one specific output, which is what I really like about this unit. Now, if we go down to HDMI, we can choose between program and preview. So program is basically what you're seeing and what's being recorded, and for my particular use case doing this, I'm going to leave it on that. So yeah, you can mess around with that. We get a USB option here. If we take a look at the USB 3.0 settings, we can also choose whether we want program or preview and at what resolution we want it at. And as you can see, there's plenty of different options down there, and we can set it just by hitting set. Now, you might be saying, what's the advantage of one way or the other? So you can use this as a USB device, which is fantastic, but if you don't want all the on-screen display stuff coming up, you just want a clean send out to the web in that webcam style thing, you can set the USB output to be one type of output and the HDMI to be the second type of output, or both the same. So it gives you 2 clean sends, or you can mix and match between preview and program. It's a bit of a tongue twister. Now, if we take a look at the mix mode over here, I've got it set to fast, which means all I have to do is hit the buttons here and it will do the transitions. I really like this. The bar for me is not something that I use, but if you want to use it, you can just simply set it. It's set there by default actually to the bar, but yeah, you can change the transition time here as well, and also change what kind of effects we want to use. But I've just got it set to cut right now, and that is fine. So you get all of these other options down here. I think one of the biggest criticisms of this, which I saw in the comment sections, which was pretty good because I didn't actually think about this at the time, to change the transitions, you got to sort of go into the menu. Now you can have, everything at the touch of a button, just for your main cameras. For example, you can switch cameras and HDMI sources, but then you can select a different transition by using the software. Pretty cool. It means you've got basically 2 hands doing something. As long as you've got good coordination, you should be fine. All right, so we've also got the picture-in-picture modes, and this will make life a whole lot easier now as well. If I just click on, where's a good place to put this? Maybe bottom left here. Now we've got picture-in-picture at the click of a button as well. No menu diving on the unit itself. Even though I didn't feel like that was too much of a trouble to get to, now it's far easier. It's still not as easy as the A10 Mini Pro in that regards, because the A10 Mini has a dedicated hardware key. And that's sometimes hard to beat. It really is. Having that dedicated hardware key is really cool. And of course, we can move this around wherever we like. Now, one thing that hasn't been updated, unfortunately, are these ones. They're still stretched. So I have no idea why they continue to put these into they should just delete all of these split screen effects. They're all completely unusable. So having that option there is good. Now, you can, of course, change the picture-in-picture option to a different camera just by using the hardware key. So I could reverse what you're seeing just by using a combination now of the computer and also, or the XPOSE software I should say, and the hardware itself. So that's really cool. I'll go back to off and go back to there when we're good to go. Now, one of the biggest criticisms I had of the Feelworld LivePro L1 was the fact that the audio options were just not very good, which made this very specific for certain types of use cases. It was perfect for someone who wasn't going to be recording audio through this, who might be using audio separately and then syncing it up in editing. But if you wanted to live stream with this and you didn't have just one camera and a mic connected to that camera, for example, it was really hard to swap between HDMI signals without losing the good audio, which is something that's finally been addressed. So if we're going to take a look at the audio source option, I've got it set to input 1. Before, all we had through the hardware on the unit itself was embedded and external. So embedded meant that every time I switched cameras, for example, the audio would switch with it, which makes it pretty unusable. At least now, if you've got a dual channel XLR adapter for your camera, then you can run 2 microphones into that HDMI signal 1 and just use that as your main audio source. So finally we get something that's still usable. Now this is still not as flexible as the A10 Mini or A10 Mini Pro in terms of its audio mixing capabilities. There still isn't any audio mixing capabilities, but now it's not going to switch cameras or switch audio sources every time you switch cameras. So it has been upgraded, which is fantastic. So now I consider this to be a really strong studio tool for recording locally or streaming, as long as you only need that one audio source. So on my GH5, I have an XLR, I think it's called a DMW2 adapter, which is 2 XLR ins, and then the camera will handle that audio, and then the recording will be through the selection on the XPOSE software. It'll be audio source 1, and that's what will be captured only. And we can change this from 1, 2, 3, or 4. What we can't do still, whether it's with the software or whether it's with the unit, is get a mix between HDMI 1 and HDMI 2 and get a set a level like that. So you are still limited to single audio ins on the HDMI, but you know what? It's still usable for the right use case. If you're doing a podcast now, I can stand behind this as saying, you know, this is going to be so much better than using that 3.5mm jack on the side, which you're going to see the audio is not going to be in sync, and that's a huge deal breaker. But now, thanks to the beauty of being able to capture the audio through the camera, you now have something that's going to be in sync, which is awesome. So yeah, thumbs up to LivePro for finally fixing that option. Now we also get some HDMI output settings. We get 8, 10, and 12-bit settings, which is pretty cool. I don't know how many other units have 12-bit. We have the color space, which is image or video. I haven't messed with any of this, but I'm just going to scroll through and show you what it looks like, because I really don't know enough about that, to be honest, to say exactly what DHPOS is. I'm not really too sure. We have a network settings here, and it shows you the IP address and all that kind of stuff. And then we get the version info. So as you can see, we've got the software version, which is the most current. One of the things I hope they address in the next XPOSE upgrade is the fact that this hardware key on the front, which assigns all of these different options, mix mode, picture-in-picture, and effects. I really wish you could just click over here on the screen on the left. You can't. A lot of the options were in this menu tab. So yeah, picture-in-picture, which is that top one on the left, is accessed via here. So yeah, clicking over here does nothing to open those menus. That would be really cool if that worked, but it's just a small nitpicky thing. It's not the end of the world, but yeah, your instinct is to click on certain things within the software, and some of it works and some of it's just inactive. You've got to click under it or above it. So yeah, it's not perfect still, but it's far better than it was before. I really feel like this now would be perfect for a lot of people who just want to do live streaming or want to record in a multi-camera format like this, like I'm doing today, and you don't want to do any post-production or very minimal post-production. You know, I screw up my lines from time to time. I have to start again and say things correctly the second or third time. So I always have to cut some stuff out of these clips, but for me, this is just now a really functional unit, being that I can capture my audio, switch cameras, and it's not going to lose my voice every time I switch. So the Feelworld LivePro L1, I know in the comments section, a lot of people were skeptical that you couldn't update this or there wouldn't be an update and all that kind of stuff, but there is. This isn't a paid or sponsored video or anything like that either. No one's asked me to review this. They did send this out for the review for the last video, but they never asked me for any follow-up video. I had so much of a good and mixed reaction to this unit that I wanted to just put together a secondary video just showcasing some of these updates. And now I think it's a much better unit. And when you turn this on, I can't do that unfortunately because it will, maybe I'll do some B-roll and put that over the top. When you turn it on, it now says Feelworld LivePro L2, which has made me laugh when I was like, oh cool, they have made an effort here, and I can see this becoming better and better over time. Lastly, if Feelworld somehow managed to give us an audio mixer for this particular system, I think this would be almost unstoppable given the price. Having those 4 HDMI inputs is a huge bonus. Thanks again, Catch you soon. See ya.